the same thoughts. I was motivated by the great Charles Lindbergh, Jimmy Doolittle, Roscoe Turner, and I ended up, as Chuck did, getting to know each of these people intimately. And that had to be the greatest accomplishment of my life, was to be recognized by those people. Wouldn't you say that, Chuck? I had such admiration for them that from a little kid on, I was motivated. I really wanted to fly. And just tickled to death I've been able to do what little I've done, and have been associated with the greats in the history of flying. The names I've mentioned, my dear friend Chuck Yeager, and another great champion, leader, a fellow that both Chuck and I admire so very much, an inspiration to all of us in our early days of flying, and that's Mr. Tex Hill. And I remember where Tex is. Hey, Tex and Major, would you stand up down there? I want everybody to see the players. There's another gentleman here whom I admire so very much. I haven't known as long as all of these other acquaintances, but I have known of him and his many accomplishments. A real leader, a man of success, who did it the hard way. He started out learning to fly and graduating from one thing to another to a great business leader. And I'm privileged to tell you that I've just recently joined Mr. Dell Smith, Chairman of the Board of Evergreen, and I am so absolutely happy to be a member of that team and that family. Mr. Dell Smith, could I get you to stand up? Here's the kid with the pipe rings, built models. The time was big enough to glue them together and try to fly them, and I had a lot of accidents then, Chuck, many more than you and I had, I think. But I wanted to do it, and I stuck with it in spite of the nausea. And that was the biggest thing I had to overcome in learning to fly, getting rid of that uncomfortable feeling in the cockpit. And I didn't have anyone to teach me aerobatics, so I ended up just doing all manner of things which I would consider unsafe now and would never recommend to anybody, but there were no people who were qualified to teach aerobatics at that time in the location where I was, and so I kept doing wing-overs until the first thing you know, I accomplished a roll, and then this or that. Everything was the objective to get rid of this nausea.
Bob?
And I was fortunate enough to manage that.
Bob, tell us about that picture right there, please.
Well, that's an oldie, boy, isn't it? That's an 038B. I was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee, and the Tennessee Air National Guard were flying these old birds back in the 30s, and the early, it started out in 40, and I guess 1940 that picture was taken. But that was sort of the beginning, and I was really hooked, I'll tell you that. It's cold in those old airplanes in the winter time. You can sleep in that flying suit.
How much flying time would you guess you would have accumulated when this picture was taken, approximately?
The way it happened, that's the way we remembered it. Now, Jim, I had returned from the war, and Bob had spent most of his time in a cricket camp over there, you know, eating potatoes and black bread. It's really so skinny today. Anyway.
And thinking about Eleanor Roosevelt.
When I came back from the war in spring of 45, I was assigned to right field there as the assistant maintenance officer in the fighter test section. Just a fluke. I asked for it because it was the closest air base in my hometown. And I had reported in, and I'd been trained as a fighter pilot the same way Bob had been. And when you're a fighter pilot, you're quite aggressive. And when you do flying in fighter airplanes, and it's always fun to jump somebody and wax their tail. Because that's, you know, you live and breathe dogfighting. And when I reported in as the assistant maintenance officer, every time they work on a P-51 or P-38 or any of the many fighters that we had in the hangar there, it was my job to go out and just run a functional flight test on the airplanes to see that the systems that they've worked on work properly. And consequently, I'd always climb up above right field at about 15, 20,000 feet, sit there like a, big hawk and wait. And Weenie would take off in an airplane, I'd jump him. Test pilots, right field, which neither Bob and I were test pilots until we went to the test pilot school and became, now I are one. And, the test pilots themselves couldn't dogfight. They hadn't been trained as Bob and I had been trained. And so they were, they piece of cake to wax your fanny. There's no problem. And they do this day after day after day. And they wouldn't fight back. And I was sitting up there one day in a P-51 looking down, waiting for some guy to take off and go have some fun with. And man, this P-38 went by me like I was standing still. He about sucked me out of the sky. I said, Jesus Christ, the first time I've ever been jumped by that. Popped this old P-51, I chased him, and he broke into me, and man, we got in a left bearing, we were out turning, and smoke was coming out of the engines, and we ended up down there and somewhere near Xenia, canopy to canopy on the deck, wide open, and until we either had to quit or, man, we're going to kill ourselves. Came back and landed, and Bob led us back and we landed. I had never met him, I'd never seen him, and he parked his P-38 there in the fighter test section, and I parked my P-51. I got out and walked over and said, man, you're Sierra Hotel with that P-38. And he said, well, you do all right too, and I introduced him to a big old lanky lieutenant named Bob Hoover. That's the first exposure that I had to Bob, and his aggressiveness even pays off today, and he's obviously getting older and more mellow. You can tell that the way he flies. Very smooth, I call it slowness. But everything that Bob had done, and Colin was talking about riding in that steering with him, when we were there, and then Colonel Boyd, then the chief of the flight test division, asked us if we wanted to go to the test pilot school. And he was impressed with the way Bob flew, and he flew a lot of air shows. In fact, Bob and I would jump the chance to take a P-80 or any kind of an airplane out on a Civil Air Patrol weekend where they put on air shows. And it was fun. You met a lot of nice people, and you got to, shine your eye and do anything you wanted to and get away with it. And consequently, Bob, or about the time we went into the test pilot school in the spring of '46, Bob used to hang around some of the airports there in Dayton, and we decided that he was going to play this trick on this gal instructor at this little flying school just outside Dayton. And old Bob went over in his civvies and signed up for pilot lessons. He ham-fisted this airplane around the sky for about 8 hours and finally talked this gal into letting him solo. That was a big mistake. Bob goes out and she, went around the pattern with him, and then she gets out and, pats him on his back and go fly her airplane. Man, it was wicked. The poor gal was wringing her hands, and Bob did a couple Sean Emil snaps on takeoff. Really wild. And that's about the way he's been flying, and he has a tremendous sense of humor in airplane. And we could go on all night talking about, how Colleen and Glennis. Colleen, Bob was courting her pretty heavy, and I was married to Glennis, and we had a T6 in the fighter test section there about the time we finished the test pilot school, and it was a smoke riding airplane. And they were trying out different kinds of smoke. Now, what the hell it had to do with winning wars, I don't know. But we were flying around this T6, and we would go up to Indian Springs Lake and write Colleen's name in the sky. Christ, it'd be upside down. And then we'd fly down to West Virginia and write Glennis. And it was really difficult to spell all these words out. And invariably, we'd trade seats, and invariably we'd come back and he were cookies down the ramp. I never been a second trying to skywrite with Bob Hoover, or he trying to skywrite with me. But that's the way our careers went for about 3 to 3.5 years after Bob came into the flight test division there. We both became test pilots. I only went to the Air Force test pilot school. I learned rather fast. Bob had to go to the Air Force and the Navy test pilot school. many times, like I mentioned in my book, was Glennis was down in West Virginia, and on the weekend, I tried to get some of the pilots to fly me down to Charleston, and one day I found a little dirt strip on the edge of a cliff on the side of this hill, and old Bob said, hey, I'll take you down this BT-13 and land on the side of this hill and let you out. It was just right near the house. And we went down there on Friday afternoon, and Bob came staggering around the side of this hill and put this thing down in the dirt, and I jumped out and strapped my parachute on back in the rear seat. He took off again and went over the end of this cliff and down. I hear this BT-13 grinding. It just sounded like that souped up pitch out here today. It's really rapid. And down there, grinding around. Pretty soon this old BT came up the side of the hill upside down. But that's the way he flew airplanes. And, he's made an art of it. He's not only has done so much for aerobatics and the development of military airplanes, but he's been very dedicated in doing it, and that's been his life. And he's a perfectionist in everything he does, even the way he dresses. And he's done an awful lot for flying aviation here in America. And you know, we having been raised and taught most everything we know by the military, you know, have been quite dedicated toward the service and our country. And he's a very loyal, dedicated person. And he's a lot of fun to dogfight with, and because he is very aggressive. I'll tell you, man, he'll wax you any chance he gets. We've hammered each other with F-84Fs, F-86s. I think the funniest thing was when he got to work for North American as a test pilot and was smoking around all these late model jets like the F-100. He was doing some of the spin tests on the F-100. And they had a new system. We used to use drag chutes on the fighters when you got them into a spin and couldn't get them out. You deployed the drag chute and just pull the tail in the air and the nose down. You release the drag chute and the thing would fly out. Well, they tried a new method. And you remember what JATO bottles were, these solid rocket jet assist takeoffs. And they decided on this F-100, they'd take and put 2 JATO bottles on each wingtip, and 2 of them firing forward and 2 of them firing to the rear. So if the airplane got in a spin, then you had a switch that you threw the direction that the airplane is spinning, and it was turning to the left, and it would fire the bottom one on the left and the front one on the back, and that would stop the rotation. You could fly the airplane out. If these guys wired the JATO bottles up backwards. Engineers for him. Bob was running these spin tests on the F-100, and got people out there watching and getting lower and lower, and pretty soon somebody hollered, you better fire off the JATOs, and he fired off the JATOs. Man, that thing turned up like this. Bob punched that in this spiral of smoke. And those are the things he's always getting tied up in, but he's an extremely dedicated individual and very, very capable, as all of you know and who have watched him fly airplanes. He never ceases to amaze me because I've watched him do aerobatics ever since 1945. And in that P-51. And Christ, he's as good today as he was then. Just like Colleen and good wine.
Well, Danny, I'd like to take Bob back just a little bit.
Or wider than
Okay, I know what Jim's referring to. And Colleen will forgive me because it was long before I ever had the great honor of meeting this darling girl on my left who's put up with me for all these 39 years. But there was a nurse that I was going with at the time. And she was stationed at a place called Constantine in Africa. And there was a bridge across this big gorge, this ravine. And I always prided myself because I learned to fly with crop dusters down in Tennessee. And I thought, well, boy, I can get down among the trees and in between and underneath anything. And I decided that I was going to fly under this bridge. And I walked across the bridge. There's plenty of room to get through there. I ran out of guts. up to the bridge, and I pulled up, and I just barely missed the top of the bridge. And I thought, well, you've got this wonder. You got to go through that bridge, underneath that bridge. So I backed off, and I came at it again, and this time I ran out of courage once more, and I went through on a knife edge. I remember I knew the bridge was wide enough. So the next time I went through it, and then as it goes with life, courage built up enormously, and I was looping around it 4 times in a row. That's your story, I'm sure. And she wasn't even impressed.
She thought you were supposed to do that. Let's...
Before you go aboard a carrier, they mark out a deck on the runway. And they put the arresting gear, the cables, for arresting the airplane. And we were briefed, all of the old North American people were just briefed hour after hour about stay clear of the arresting cables, because there's an enormous whip or snap reaction when the cable is cut. It whips out, and it's lethal. And on a carrier, that's the reason you see everybody drop below the deck on those little, I can't remember what they call it, catwalks. The catwalks on the side of the carrier where the arresting gear is located. Because when the cables snap, I mean, it's just so lethal you can't believe. Catching too. Well, the briefing officer who was responsible for the program said, "You're our people, stay clear, stay clear." And I sat there all these briefings, and I had to shoot a 27-foot off-center engagement. And it was a new type. It was called an A-frame hook. Most of the hooks were a single hook like this with a horseshoe on the end to catch the cable. And they had devised or designed a new type hook. It was called an A-frame, so it was like so. And it had a snubbing device that made it catch the cable more readily than the former type hooks. I snatched this thing 27 feet off center. The cable snapped. You talk about a heartbreaker. When you look behind you and you see people just rolling and flailing all over the place, that's a heartbreaker. And I rode out because I didn't get stopped. And I got the airplane stopped on the runway after I left the carrier, the simulated carrier deck. And I didn't want to taxi back. I was just so concerned about how many people had been injured. There were no fatalities. There were several people who were injured. And it was sad but kind of funny. The very fellow who was briefing about stand clear lost the cheeks of his buttocks.
Hey Bob, before we go into the bottle, we're supposed to put a half a bottle of pet milk in this bottle and fill it the rest of the way up with this brew of dexter maltose and Kalo syrup. And that was Colleen's job, having been married at that time in the afternoon. And this was her honeymoon, and we took Mickey all the way across country for 3 days. And the first place we stopped after leaving Dayton was Oklahoma City. And he was the first lieutenant and I was captain. We didn't have a hell of a lot of money. In fact, we couldn't even afford a motel. And we had a couple blankets in the car, and we stopped in a graveyard. What a quiet place, you know. We didn't know it in the graveyard. And we got these blankets out, and Colleen and Bob sacked out, and I laid down on the ground and left Mickey in the back seat. And during the night, Colleen had gotten up and started sprinkling rain, and Bob didn't know it. And you got into the car and was sleeping, and old Bob woke up and was feeling around on the ground for Colleen. He couldn't find her. And he used to have these nightmares. He got up with this blanket over his head and sort of ricocheted off the trees and yelling for Colleen, and we got the lights on and got things settled down beside it. We put our head on the west, and we rolled into to Muroc out there where we'd been transferred for the X-1 program. And after 3 days, and this mixture, or this bottle, big jug, had laid in the back of car in the sun, it gets fermented. Every time we'd pour half of that thing in a bottle and put milk in it, man, it'd foam. And must have been about 25 proof, and we'd feed it to little Mickey. And it was Colleen's job. We went through every little town on Highway 66 from Dayton to Muroc in Barstow, and we left diapers in every little town. That was Bob and Colleen's honeymoon. Anyway, really a lot of fun.
That went out and bought disposable diapers.
Good idea. Yeah, the bachelor. Yeah. Anyway, we've had a lot of fun bumming around like that, and especially Bob. Oh, you could go on all night, as I mentioned before. We were in the B-25 one time when, after Colleen and after Bob was married to Colleen, and I was married to Glennis, and we were assigned to the X-1. They wanted to fit us up with pressure suits, so the old captain tube suits that we were to wear in the X-1. And we went up to Worcester, Massachusetts, at the David Clark Company, who made munching wear and bras for women in advance. And old man David Clark, when he was fitting us up with these pressure suits, said, "You boys married?" "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, I'll give you a few goodies to take back home to your wives." And he said, "Well, Bob," and he said, "What size bras do your wives wearing?" "Hell, I don't know." He said, "I think bras are so good you put beans in them, they look good." Not that Colleen or Glennis could fill them out, but we loaded up our bags after getting fixed for a pressure suit. Bob and I were heading back to right field. It's B-25. Bob, you tell him what happened, man. I'm too scared.
He's got to be the bravest guy I've ever known in my life. I was flying this thing, and he was sitting in the right seat. He had flown over, and I was flying by. And we got hit by lightning. I've never been hit by lightning before. I haven't since, thank goodness. And I couldn't stand it again, I don't think. Well, I'll tell you, it blew the glass out of the nose of the airplane. And I don't know if you know what ozone smells like. I never knew before, but we sure got a taste of it then. And the wind rushing through that airplane, and we were blinded, absolutely blinded. And I was hanging on to controls because I couldn't think of anything else to do. Finally, Chuck looked over at me, and he calmed down. He figured, well, old Bob's not scared, so I won't be scared. I looked at him, and he wasn't scared, so I wasn't scared. We were both terrified. I don't know if either one of us saw any panic. I think we've both been outside.
We don't want to skip too fast.
Like Chuck's one mission where he got shot down, but mine didn't quite turn out that way, though I had every hope that it might. I had a flight of 4 Spitfires. Spitfire was a wonderful airplane for an island defender, the Battle of Britain. That's what it was. The airplane was originally designed as a defense fighter, a point interceptor, as we know it. Light wing loading, high rate of climb, a lot of capability in the turn, but no range. And the war moved away from the Spitfire so quickly. During Chuck's combat, he had the Mustang, which had the legs to escort the bombers all the way, but the Spitfires were turned back, and then the bombers were beaten alive. I had my choice of airplanes for combat because of that story I told you about with General Cannon. I chose Spitfires. On the day I shot down, all I could think about was, you dummy, you could have had a P-38. 2 inches. But on that particular mission, I had a flight of 4, and we were doing harassment. We were bombing enemy shipping in the Mediterranean Sea, just to create a nuisance, to keep an air raid alert going all the time. And our object that day was a convoy of ships. We carried little 250-pound bombs, which were nothing. They wouldn't do much damage to anything. But it would keep the alert going. keep everybody in the air raid shelters. And it was the fourth mission I'd flown that particular day. And you do vertical bombing. Believe it or not, we didn't have the sophistication, Chuck, that you had on the Mustang. We had a ring bead sight, like you can remember from World War I. You had the little thing that stuck up on the front of the nose and a little ring back here like this. And so, in order to bomb, you would just go absolutely vertical, and you'd keep turning the airplane until you got the two lined up on the target, and then you would release, and then it was up to the wind as to whether the bomb hit the target or not. Well, believe it or not, I got a hit on that last mission. And it wasn't me they were searching for. They were searching for some of their own people. And I pulled off the target, pulled up, and I happened to see these 6 Focke-Wulf 190s. Everybody gave me credit for facing the worst of all the 190s, the long noses, Chuck. Not so. Not so. It was just a standard old Focke-Wulf. But we carried belly tanks on those Spitfires, and they were Mark 5s. And they were not very good. The Mark 9 was more comparable to the P-51. They had the same engines, P-51. This Mark 5 had about 1,100 horsepower. And I pulled my handle as soon as I saw the enemy, and the handle came right out of my hand like this. So I still had the tank. We were split up because everybody had been turning like this to line up on the target. And I saw my wingman, who was 90 degrees away from him, a good mile or so, to attack him, and he was the burner. Please, you know what's going on, I told you. But he was shot down right off. I was on the tail of the 190 that was getting him. And I got strikes, and I got credit for that kill. But he went down in flames and lost his life. The other 2 fellas hit the deck. And I hope you will forgive me, but you and I knew some of those fellas that were like that, Chuck. They were real cowards. And they weren't thinking about flight integrity, and that's what the whole thing is about. You've got to be a member of the team. And you have to stay there. It costs you your life. You have to help that person. And you can only be a team. You can't separate like that. And that's why Chuck and I are still here. We've always been team players. These fellows separated and headed for home. I stayed there, and I knew I had no survival, no way to get back to the beach because I was carrying so much drag. That tank attached to the bottom of that airplane. The Spitfire only had just a little bit of fuel. Most of it could not appreciate. It was less than 100 gallons of fuel. The belly tank carried, I think, another 30 or 40. I don't recall now precisely, but it wasn't much. And I called and I said, send the Dumbo, which was a little walrus. They call them walrus, the little airplane that would come out on floats and scoop you out of the water. They were great heroes, really, these Englishmen that flew these things because they'd be faced with combat, but they were courageous. They'd come out for you. And I called, and they said the Dumbo's launched. And then I was in a turning battle. I knew I was going to bail out. I knew I couldn't get back. So I just kept straightening out and heading closer towards home. And then when they would attack again, I'd brake real tight, and the fighters would go by, they'd overshoot. And I continued doing that until eventually I got hit. That beauty stands for all those great things that our forefathers worked so hard to create what each of us enjoy. And when it isn't there, boy, it's a heartbreaker. It really is. And if there's any one thing I can just say to you, the loss of that, it's just like something, you're nothing. You have nothing. You're down to a mere existence. You're alive and that's it. And life is hardly worth living when you lose that liberty that our forefathers achieved for all of us. So I guess it was probably a good thing for me that I experienced that because I learned something that's so very important. And to this day, and right here at Oshkosh, I worked for Al Rockwell from the company out of just the party, and Al's been out of it a long time, but he had one of his sons out here on the flight line. And Paul and Tom know, as Jim and Chuck do, that when the national anthem's played, if you're around this fella, you better be standing at attention and have your hat off and your hand over your heart. And this young Rockwell's son was standing there, and there were two kids leaning up against the car. And they just sat there. And I yelled at them to stand up and stand at attention and do it now. And they did reluctantly. And when the national anthem was completed, this big guy, I mean, he was just enormous. He walked over and I thought, uh-oh. It was a kid's father. And instead of wanting to pound upon me, I gave him the little lecture about the importance of that flag. And this fellow said, "Mister," he said, "I've never had it put to me like that." He said, "I respect you, I appreciate that. And these two kids will never again be at anything but attention when that national anthem's played." Al Rockwell's son wrote me a letter, and he said, "I grew up with a silver spoon in my mouth, and it never meant anything to me until then." And I hope that each of you, as you walk your way of life, will convey that to some young person who hasn't been taught, for whatever reason, what it means to all of us. And for those of us, like Chuck and so many of you here in this gathering, you fought for it, and we owe it to those who have come along after us.
Bob, with those kinds of thoughts, Bob, I'm sure that escape must have been paramount in your mind. And
we were flying a total of about 100 hours a month in 15, 20, 25 different kinds of airplanes. And we were also pushing about an 18-hour schedule per day, flying on a lot of high priority programs. And when we went out to New York in 1947, the fun that we had flying all of these different kinds of airplanes, the P-80 and the P-84, which of course led to Bob's disaster in that F-84 when the engine, flew all to pieces, and Bob rolled over the top and hit the tail and broke both of his long gangly legs. kind of laid him up for a while. But I think that was a wonderful period of time, and it was one of the periods that Bob probably demonstrated his capability as a very, very well-trained test pilot, because our classmates, as I recall, like Jim Doolittle Jr. and Jack Ridley and some of the others that flew with us, were always looking to Bob for help in flying these airplanes to their maximum performance capabilities. He always had a feel for the aircraft and also a feel for its performance capabilities. And I think that was a great period of time, and it was probably your sundown to the service when you got out and went to work for the Allison Division of General Motors and then went to work for Rockwell. In my opinion, it was a fun time.
Let me just recall something of great importance to me with my friend Chuck here. One little exception to what he said. We both thought we were red hot. We were military pilots, and we were absolutely convinced that there wasn't a civilian test pilot in the world as good as we were. Isn't that about the size of it, Chuck?
That's true, too.
And if you read his book, I guess I'm the only lucky guy that's an exception to that. But what I wanted to share with you is that the flying wing, the low prototype, the N9M, was about to be evaluated by the Air Force. And Chuck, myself, and Jack Ridley were out there on the X1 program, and they said, we want you fellas to evaluate the flying wing. So we flipped coins, and I won. So I thought, well, we all talked about it.
You won the chance to fly first. That's what you did.
That's right. With the toss of the coin got me the first slot. So we had known that the test pilot, this civilian test pilot, would go like this on every takeoff. And incidentally, somebody checking out a Spitfire the first time, that's the way they did it. Because they swap hands from the controls over here to get the gear up. But I was going to convince the whole world that we military test pilots were so sharp, there wouldn't be a bobble on that takeoff. I'd just go out of there the first time I ever flew, and it'd just be smooth as silk right up. So I got in the hangar, and I talked to the crew chief, and I said, where do the civilian test pilots trim the controls? And he said, right about here. I said, is that the takeoff? Yeah, right about there. So now I decided that if I let my hands off the controls and just held them like this, ready to grab, that airplane would just come right off the ground and fly itself off, and it'd never be a bobble until I pull the gear up, and then I'd be able to handle it, or I'd have plenty of speed. So I planned this out very well. Now, I must tell you that I think that most of us have a little bit of tenseness or of tightness because you wish to do a good job when you're testing a new airplane for the first time. I will share with you that I have that feeling. I want to do it so well that I'm kind of uptight about wanting to do it well. So I was out on the runway, going down the runway, and I had both feet on the rudders, and everything was going fine. And I had my hands like this, and I wasn't touching anything, and I had the throttles wide open, and the airplane's going down the road, and everything's coming along fine. But it isn't taking off. It's glued to the runway. And now I'm so much faster than takeoff speed, you can't believe it. I'm almost up to cruise speed, and I'm still stuck on the runway. And I happened to look out this side, and I saw the elevon wide open. It's just like dive brakes. I looked over here, wide open. I said, you dummy, they're connected. So I took my feet off the rudders like this, and the airplane immediately. Now remember, it was trimmed for takeoff, and I'm up to cruise speed. The thing went whoop, just like this, straight up, and I pushed forward and pushed straight down, back. Barely missed the ground, you know. You talk about dumb civilian test pilot. This dumb military test pilot. That was the worst gyration that airplane had ever seen. Just bang down like this, up like this. And then, to recoup a little bit of grace, they had said that the airplane could not be rolled or looped. Ho, ho, ho.
That's a big mistake.
So I went out where they couldn't see me, and I played with it and worked out my loops and my rolls. And I came back across the base doing both, which they said he couldn't do. So I redeemed myself in some small way. Then my dear friend Chuck Yeager gets in it, and he gracefully flies it off without a bottle. Remember that?
Yes, I did. Of course, I didn't have number 11 feet either.
Dan,
What finer person, never a better aviator that I've ever known in my life, to be in the hero role image for the youth of our country. I think of Neil Armstrong as another real gem, a fellow who's had a lot of high risk. A lot of people don't realize how much risk he had. Maybe Chuck doesn't even know this, but he was launched one day when I was up there at Edwards, Chuck, that X-15, and boy, they cut him loose at the wrong time. I know Chuck was cut loose at the wrong time, and it's very difficult to explain to you what that means, but that means you're released from the shackles. And if your rocket motors don't fire, boy, you're in real trouble. And even if they do fire, if you don't have enough fuel aboard to get you from here to there, you've got a real problem. And I watched Chuck go through that. I watched Neil go through it. And boy, for two people to be classified as national heroes, aren't they two of the greatest?